And we'll start with the front page of the Daily Mail. And Steve N. Allen, is Boris back?
It could well be. And not only back, the dream team, because technically nightmares are dreams. Could Boris and Rishi now unite to save the Tories? You know, like when every so often you get Magneto and Professor X have to team up to fight some other mutants. It's that kind of mashup, you know, when plot lines get really desperate. And I was speaking with someone earlier today who was saying the thing about Boris being the new Boris Johnson possibly being the PM again is that it does answer the question of, oh, but you have no mandate. We need another general election. No one voted for you. I suppose that solves it. He's proven that he can win elections. He's also proven that he acts in a way that means he has to resign as Prime Minister. Very few people have been Prime Minister, but fewer people have had to resign as Prime Minister. So he's in that very small, select bunch of people I'm not necessarily sure you want to be back in. But instead of the battle between the two ones, Rishi and Boris, if they team up in some way, then maybe that solves this problem. Although I was watching the TV earlier on, and you were on it. And you were talking about the numbers that Rishi's already got. Do you know, if he's ahead number-wise, why would he compromise in a way that gives him the subordinate position? So maybe it won't turn out this way.
The thinking is, and you're right to raise that point, because you know he's already played second fiddle to Boris Johnson once already. Of course, stood down as Chancellor in Boris Johnson's administration. But the thinking is that if Boris gets 100 Tory MPs. And if Rishi does, then when those two names go to the membership, it's Boris all the way. So this is the concern for Rishi Sunak, is if Boris hits the threshold, at that point Sunak probably has to do a deal to save his political career. Yeah,
because it's not as if the numbers are going to change. You know, these people have already been sampled once, and we now know what they think about Rishi Sunak. But it would feel like maybe it's worth a roll of the dice just to see, because you're right, he'd be going back to exactly the same position. Not like he could ever then use that as a position to mature to Prime Minister ever again. So why not roll the dice and see whether you actually win?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? That's a tantalising question. Nick Dixon, this is a sliding doors moment for the Tory party. Sunak or Boris Johnson, it's the ultimate yellow brick road, isn't it?
Yeah, to me it has to be Boris, Mark, because, and not to be mistaken for what I would ultimately want in a dream world, by the way, because people reply to me on Twitter and say, what's wrong with you? You know, I would like a new party that I lead, but in the real world, Boris is the only option, because I think they had no moral right to get rid of him in the first place, because the people voted for him. And then they did this coup. It was the Rishi coup. The members rejected it. As you say, they voted for basically anyone but Rishi. They would have liked Kemi, I'm sure, but they were given Liz Truss, and they said, fine, not Rishi. So now, the only thing they can do to save themselves, potentially, I say potentially because they'll still probably lose, but to avoid a complete wipeout of the election, I think, is to bring back Boris. I think it has to be. And he's apparently reached out to Sunak. Last I heard, Sunak hadn't replied, so he may be less up for it. But to me, that's their only option. The only downside is that Boris could be investigated and lose a by-election. So there is that, which is pretty significant. But I think that's what they have to do. And I would actually add a caveat. I would say they've got Boris in a more weakened position now. He's desperate to come back, I imagine. Tell him no carry anywhere near number 10 and shake on that. And I think he'd go for it.
There you go. The no carry rule. That's a red line for Nick Dixon.